Indeed, the other day when a section of your team visited my office, it was very interesting to realize that there was such a great idea as the creative university, and I think it typifies the times that we find ourselves in this country. I think that for me, it showed that there's a lot of hope, and for those of us who were, sort of born to be creatives, very excited about the creative industry. It's obviously great to see that you guys have organized yourself, almost 150 plus of you who come together to share in creativity and just look at the future that is creativity. So I'm really very honored to be part of this university and to share my thoughts and hopefully to also learn from you on the ideas of creativity. I think that just a bit of introduction to my trajectory. I'm an architect, as has already been said. I run a multidisciplinary firm, Mobius Architecture. We fluctuate between 8 and 12, depending on the kind of work that we have to do at any time. And yeah, I've been in the business maybe for 17 years, running my own practice for about 13, together with partners. So that's a bit of a background. I must note that in the earlier discussions with the four men here gathered, I did also realize that they are pre-seconds. So for those of you who went to pre-sec, this is a bit more trust. But not to say that other schools are not going. So we just want the NMS. I must rub it in with but definitely a great school. It's truly my pleasure. But this evening, the discussion and I think what has been said is pretty interesting. I think the topic was strategies to explore your creativity, my viewpoint of it, and I mean I can talk to death about it, but I try to sort of get some direction in it. So I'll be looking at what I think some of those strategies are. It's not exhaustive, but they are the ones that came to me pretty early, and I'm sure when the Q&As come up, we can further probe and maybe we can judge my mind to bring out some other stuff. So we'll look at what I think some of those strategies are, and then we will go on to how do you make money, with creativity, using your creativity. How do you do that? Again, from my perspective, and not only sharing it in the thought of being an architect, but also sharing it in the thought of being a creative. And then also maybe what is the future of architecture in Ghana. So these are the three sort of highlights that I sort of got from the direction that was given. So I'd like to quickly sort of start stepping into that discussion on exploding strategies to explode your creativity, and it's in no particular fashion. So I just sort of wrote down the stuff. I think that the first thing about, for me, creativity is, and I'll sort of relate it to wanting to be good at anything that you sort of set your mind to. So, for example, if you want to be the fastest runner in the world, the question is, who would you be running up against? You will surely be running up against Usain Bolt in history, because he's made the 9.58 or so, which is a world record. So it just establishes this thing that you need to chase the masters. But this is the first thing. There are masters in each area of creativity, and these masters are not, limited by boundary. These masters go across all, cultures. They go across all peoples, all races, and so you need to find these masters in whichever field you find yourself. So the first thing I've said, I think we'll start is this idea that one must follow the masters. One must follow those who have made a great name in whatever area of creativity it is. So, for example, in architecture, you'll hear the great names like Frank Lloyd Wright, Mies van der Rohe. You would hear Frank Gehry, you would hear Norman Foster, you would hear Richard Rogers. The names go on to death. David Ajay, and such an amazing designer who lives with us and is from Ghana in parentage. So you need to sort of look at who are those people and what have they done. When I say follow them, understand what their lives were, understand what their trajectories were, what inspires them, how do they go about their design processes, what kind of projects have they done. Try to follow up on what they've written, about their own work and their own processes, because these are the people who have made a name in the profession and who have created buildings and spaces and created artifacts that we talk about today. So I'm talking about architecture, but relate it quickly into mobile telephony. And if you want to really talk about great design, we're talking about Apple and iPhone. And so I want to be a creative in the phone industry, but I don't understand what the iPhone is about. That's a problem. So you need to sort of look for those who've made a mark in whichever area that you sort of find yourself, and start, learning about them. Start, finding out what it is they did, how it is they do what it is they do. And I think that starts the first journey on how do you sort of get to your own creativity. Let me say, as point number 2, that you need to find out the truth for yourself. Now, the reason why I'm saying that is that a lot of people who find themselves in schools, particularly design schools, who are being taught by their lecturers who do very well to try and expose them to knowledge and all those things. But the thing about universities is the search for truth, veritas, right? This is the general idea. So it's not about what your lecturers are trying to tell you. It's about fact checking. It's about doing your own research. You are no longer in the secondary schools where you seem to be fed and all of those kind of things. You really find yourself now in a place where it's about finding the truth. So your lecturer may say one thing, but if you are really immersing yourself in trying to find what knowledge is, it won't be what the lecturer is saying necessarily. It's going to be what everybody else is saying around the subject. So immediately the lecturer may speak, and how Ghana is. People it's only Ghana. It's here and abroad. People get a little testy about students questioning their knowledge, but those who are in search of truth never do. I mean, they're always in a discussion about what it is they think, and they'll make suggestions to you. Eventually, you'll be left to make those decisions. So I would say that for me, under that same idea, one must fact check and look for the truth. You cannot simply rely on what your teachers or your lecturers say. Like, for example, they'll tell you what is possible and what is not possible. But I think that in the world of creativity, it's not about impossibilities, it's about possibilities. So you shouldn't be interested in people who sort of limit your ability to think beyond the box. You need to sort of put out the craziest ideas. And this I learned having an opportunity to teach at Ashesi University for just 1.5 years in a fantastic class I thoroughly enjoyed. Just trying to sort of teach these students. Not really, I didn't really teach. I sort of had a class together, and they have no idea. I learned so much from them, as much as they also learned from me. So it's just this idea that we are sharing knowledge, and that's the kind of attitude that a creative must have of all the possibilities. All things are possible, and so one has to crazy think and drop all those crazy ideas that you have, all the things that you thought were impossible. I'll give you an example. I go back years when I was in tech, when we were using 3310s, and there was no idea of what iPhones or single screen phones or were. And I remember saying to somebody that I think it is possible in the future to pay money to somebody through this telephone idea. He thought it was crazy, it wasn't possible. But today, that is and normal. So when it comes to creativity, one must always, crazy think. I mean, you think about what they show in videos like um, what do you call it, Avengers and X-Men. Today, it's happening. You may not be looking, but all these crazy ideas that are created by these great thinkers, it's happening. So creativity plays a great role in looking into the future and thinking about how this world is actually going to be. So it's very important to sort of always have this probing mind. You definitely want to have a sketchbook that puts out a lot of these crazy things. And don't mind how crazy people say you are. Just keep thinking crazy because that's what brings out genius. So you need to crazy think and drop all your ideas. Eventually you will refine them and find the truth in them. I think that one of the things that will also lead us, since I'm sort of dealing with academia and all of those things, is this fact that you really need to seek information. You need to read. You need to watch videos concerning a subject area that you're interested in. And today, look, iPads, iPhones, look, the iPhone 12 is just talking about 5G. This is huge technology that will just link us to so much information. It's at your fingertips. Formerly, people had to travel around the world to look for information, to go to school in Ivy League schools. Today, it's not the case. You are able to access information and to study. So the world is at your fingertips, really. So you need to chase information. You need to inform yourself. I mean, yes, it's not everybody who's going to learn through reading. Some will learn through doing it. Some will also learn through watching videos. There are various ways in which people learn. So some of these things will help you to gain knowledge in the subject area and tell you what others are doing and how they're doing it, so that it can help you to inform yourself. So that's, at this point, maybe that's about 3 points that I'm sort of put out there. The fourth point, which is maybe what you don't realize, what social media and design, I used to tell a lot of my colleagues when I was in school that what we were doing for the 6 years was trying to discover ourselves. The secret to your creativity is discovering who you are. It's discovering who you are. Who are you exactly? What are the values that you've grown up to hold? And that, in a sense, is this idea of discovering philosophy. What is your philosophy? What guides you? And I'll make an example of myself. Very early in my life, I had the opportunity to study classical piano. And in classical piano, like every other area of creativity, you're exposed to the masters. You're exposed to those who've done it before and how they did it. So anybody who say you do play classical piano, you must have obviously studied the masters by Beethoven, Tchaikovsky, Mozart, so on and so forth. So in doing that, you soon realize as you gravitate that there are certain people that you actually sort of align with in their approach. And for me, that was why as a very interesting composer, using simplicity to just found. And that became very exciting to me. But then going into architecture school, I got to understand that a little bit more when it came to design approaches. And two, all the readings and doing, right? So you learn to do, you need to sort of put your hands so that make mistakes. And that's what school affords you. That's why I said you need to discover yourself. So you're on that path and you start realizing that I've learned about the classical era, I've learned about this, I've learned about that, and I have opinions about who it is. But in my approach, I believe that one must create essence. Some of these things have come from, for me personally, living in Ghana and constantly being faced with the lack of resources, right? Everything that we have to use in the built environment has to be imported or the other. So then the question for me is, how do you found anybody? How do you create phenomenon, which is what design is, using the fewest elements? This is something that I'm very interested in. So it's about understanding yourself in so many ways. For me, it's about discovering what is my process and what do I value. I believe, for example, in nature. I believe that we have great weather all year round, particularly when I use a Ghanaian sample. I've done a lot of my work And so the questions I asked is, why are we not designing to merge ourselves with nature? Why are we not linking ourselves with nature? And so this idea of inside outside living, which may have even been put in words, but it's obviously what you believe, and my case, what I believe. I think that we have great weather all year round in Ghana. So it begins the question of how do we live in our buildings, offices, homes, wherever it is, workplaces. Why are we not living in unison and in some sort of agreement with nature? So it guides my process, it guides my philosophy. And so you need to discover your philosophy. It's critical. It's your viewpoint, it's your approach, but you cannot find it on day one. In fact, as I walk now, how many years of practice, and I'm still discovering myself. Maybe I'm still honing what I believe. And that's what designers do. They try to still, interrogate their minds about what this future is, what the process is, and so on and so forth. So that's point number 4. Discover yourself, find your viewpoint, find your philosophy. It's critical, and it's at the core of exploding on your creativity. It's critical. You also want to, in your process, you need to intern. You need to intern. I mean, I will switch just quickly into theology, where Elijah is shadowed by Elisha, and Elisha follows him, and he gets to a point where he says, "I want 10 times your power." I've always said that there is nobody in this world who's achieved anything that did not follow somebody who did it. I'll give you an example. Kobe Bryant, the late Kobe Bryant, who was an amazing basketball player. But he came into it respecting Michael Jordan. Indeed, a lot of the great players today, LeBron James, and I know there's a whole debate about who's the GOAT, but those of us who saw Jordan, each one of these guys are sort of following a leader. So you sort of have to find a master that you're following. You need to find somebody who's good at a trade, and you study from them. Like when you go to the musicians, it's the same thing. A lot of these guys saw other people who were great, and they understudied them. And through that, they also found their styles and who it is, but when they found their confidence. So it's definitely important to intern a master. You need to sort of first see it and say, look, I like this guy's approach. It agrees with some of the things that I know and I'd like to discover. One of the great architects that I truly respect is a Japanese architect by the name of Tadao Ando. And Tadao is he has a very interesting trajectory into the field of architecture. He's not actually schooled as an architect. He chases after Corbusier, and I used to heard about Corbusier as a great architect. He chases after him. This guy is a pugilist, a boxer who goes to fight, makes money, and then travels to go and see architectural buildings to try and inform himself. He looks for opportunities to work in people's offices. And through chasing that, you'll be amazed that somebody who did not have formal education in architecture today is a principal laureate, which is thought to see the Nobel Prize in architecture. So it typifies the point about interning under a master, studying under somebody you truly respect when it comes to the field. I also think that we need to, and so that's point number 5, orderly fashion. I think that we also need to study a lot of history. And by history, I mean the past. What has existed before? What is it now? And now that you are being brought to it with your viewpoint, what will it be in the future? That's what creatives do. We're always trying to innovate and define the world within our eyes. So trust those eyes, trust what you see. What you see is not what everybody sees. And that's why it's a very unique business. And that's why people seek after you. So you need to hone that. And the way to hone that is to stand on the shoulders of history and the past. So that you then know what the present is and be able to then think what the future will be. So history is important. World history, design history, what has it been before, what is it going to be, so on and so forth. So those things are necessary. And point number 7, which I think is most of the things I've said are easily said, but they're very hard to find. This one was maybe the hardest thing that you will have to try and discover. And I've written it that it's not easily figured out, but you have to look out for the magical. In exploring your creativity, you have to look out for the magical. You need to create something that is magical, that is dumbfounding at some point. That is not, it looks simple in my mind, but if you think about it a little harder, you wonder how could this be? How could this have been created? So, for example, when you think about the making of the iPhone and you read the stories about the late Steve Jobs and his innovation in trying to create this new phone and technology. There are times when he was asked, was he creating technology? And he tell you he wasn't creating technology, he was creating magic. And I think that that's why there's such an allure about the iPhones and all the competitors keep following the innovation that keeps coming. I can't be judged by that. Anyway, let me just leave that there. But it's about the magical. You need to create something that is deep. For me, I've also realized that even in theology, again, for God or the Creator to bring His own Son onto earth with Jesus Christ, you then start sort of wondering why did He have to use miracles to prove his nature or his being, heal the sick and raise the dead, and so on and so forth. That's because human beings just are moved by magic. And you need to sort of realize this. Because if we realize that, then we're able to create magical stuff. We're able to create things that just simply dumbfound thinking and ideas. So that's the first part of the discussion. Maybe 7 points on how do you explore your creativity. And I hope that I've done some justice to that in some bits, because we don't have too much time, and I'd love to hear what your questions and comments are. The second thing, though, is how do you monetize your creativity? And look, it's such an important topic on how do you make money out of creativity and so on and so forth. It's interesting to note that those in the Western world rely on Africa for resources. This is a sickening thing that's continued for centuries. So they come for the gold, and they come for the bauxite, they come for all of those things, the diamonds, and they go out there and they create value, right? They create value out of what it is they have gotten from here in the natural resource. So it says that creativity itself is a very important thing, because out of what they bring out, when you look at the total value chain, the resources are sitting at just about 5% of the total money to be made. So if I went to Congo Brazzaville and I got out a diamond, the cost of that could be 5 cedis. But by the time I'm giving you just a chip of that diamond as a diamond ring, that could be 700 cedis. It means that they've created value. And so the first thing I think, in trying to monetize your creativity is to understand the value that you bring to creativity. What value do you bring to creativity? I mean, you're creating stuff. What is the value of what you're creating? If you don't understand the value that you bring to the process, then you obviously cannot monetize your value or your creativity. You can't. You need to understand, I'm in this thing. I'm participating. I've been asked to do this thing. What have I done that elevates this discussion? And I'll give you an example in some of the work that we do. I mean, we've been privileged to design buildings that real estate people, developers will sell to others. And that's what keeps the work going, right? So what happens then is that we are given, say, a $300,000 budget to build a house. And when you touch it, when you do it, the guy is able to sell the 300 for, including all his costs and everything, for about 600 or $700,000. And he sells it pretty quickly. So now immediately he's asking himself, why is it that I can sell your building very quickly and I can't sell others that are done with others very quickly? It keeps seeming glued to you because there's a certain element you have in your approach that, if you understand, is making people want to buy it. It's almost like musicians, right? You write a piece of music and whatever Bernard Boy puts out is gold. So you sort of have to ask yourself, what is happening? And you realize that in all those instances, again, it goes back to the beginning, understanding yourself, your process, your philosophy, and sticking with your philosophy. You can't compare yourself to that. You shouldn't. Once you've done that, understand the value you bring to the process. And when you understand that value, you will then now go on to the second. You must know how to market this value. And to market the value, one must think about precedence. So there's a lot of precedence. In the music field, you've seen how the transitions have happened from people like Michael Jackson creating music and eventually having to own their own masters, and now even in death, generating more than $350 million yearly to his family, and so on and so forth. It's about understanding what you bring to that process, and being able to market that. So, typically as an architect, I've always seen my job as being able to, beyond creating value, I'm shaping resources, and therefore shaping capital. And so to have the brains to do that, and that capital to raise money. So I'll give you an example. If you have to build a mall that will cost $100 million, for example, you're eventually being given the task to shape that money. That money that you shape over the next 10 or 20 years is going to raise untold income for the owners of the very mall. So it will help you then now to monetize what you should be charging on a project like this, because you are bringing value to the process. So I think that it's very it's very important to understand what value you bring, and those are the two things I want to know, and to know how to market that value, how to call the right price for the value. Let me say that as young creatives, you are looking for the opportunity to put out your creativity, to show your viewpoint, to show how you approach that. So very early, you may not be able to call the biggest number. It's almost cutting your teeth at the job. It's almost losing to gain, but you are losing to be able to get a mark on the market. You're losing so somebody can hear the sound or the beat or your voice or your rap or whatever it is, or your painting. That loss is going to gain you so many things. It's going to gain you a name, it's going to gain you a certain approach in the economy. So it's important that maybe at the very beginning, you build your brand and your approach. And once you do that, and people taste the value that you bring, and they value what it is you brought, it's almost automatic. When they come and you call the price, you call it. There are a lot of creatives who charge crazy money for being creative. And that's because they found themselves. That's because they've been able to discover that. So these are the two main things on what I think will help you to monetize your creativity, which is understanding your value and knowing how to sort of price your value or to market your value. Now on to the third, and I think just checking my time, I've done about 39 minutes from 6. I'd like to keep it that way so we can have more fun interaction. Maybe further speak a little bit more when the questions come. But then the question on the future of architecture in Ghana, I'm sure this question is purely, aimed at me because I'm an architect, also media secretary of architects in the last 3 years, which I wear very proud of. The first thing I have to say is I think that the future of architecture is very bright. I think that this country, and unless you haven't traveled very far, if you travel around the world, we are only just scratching the surface. We're only just beginning. This country has a lot that it has to solve in its built industry, in its built environment. For example, I'll give you a simple example. When you think about the city of Accra ending from Jamestown, if you drew a radius all the way to maybe Adenta, think about it. It is possible. We haven't thought about the design of our city very critically. So instead, what we all do is to develop very, laterally underground. We are not densifying our cities. And so we are wasting resources. We are destroying the land. So the city just keeps spreading far and wide. And that's because we don't have a master plan. So if you're asking about the future of architecture, it's right. I mean, if you look at the old cities or old living areas like cantonments, bridge, so on and so forth, what's happened? They were built as acre properties, acre 0.5, 2 acre properties, and now we're re-densifying them to take on more people living per square meter of land. So you then realize that there was a lot of waste, and now we are trying to fill in the gaps. So it's the same thing that's sort of going to happen to all the different parts. So if you're creative today, you're a young person trying to enter the field of architecture, this is something that you must consider, that you have a lot to offer. That's number one, just in the economy of it, and where it is really. I'm saying there's a lot of opportunity. Point number two is that we are at the point, unfortunately, a lot of people are stuck on trying to replicate what they see in Europe and the rest of the world as, as the only thing that they know. But the essence of hiring architects and creatives is to define who we are as a people. And in Ghana and in Africa generally, we have a great opportunity to do that. It's not very much the same in places like China. In China, if you have to hire an architect, you have to be very wealthy. You either hire a very huge architect who is going to do like 1 million residences for everybody to just go and buy, sort of like selling an iPhone to everybody. But in Ghana, people are able to procure architects to create that special element that defines who they are, their lifestyles, and what they value generally. So there's a lot of opportunity for architects and creatives in this economy to start defining themselves and start creating an amazing landscape of buildings. And some of these buildings have to really respond to culture. It needs to respond to the tropics, the climatology that we find ourselves in. I think that we've done a lot with music. We've done a lot with art. We've also done a lot with architecture. The problem with architecture for me is that we are not really out there because we are not trained that way to be very loud. But times are changing, and at the institute at this time, one of the main theme for us at the institute in the next 2 years is visibility for the architect, and really putting out the creative as somebody who really brings value to the built environment. Because we shape spaces. I mean, basically, everybody goes to a building, a home, and these buildings have the power to transform your futures. And that's what we do. I mean, when we design buildings for our clients and so on and so forth, we try to create a piece of heaven for the moment, basically. So it's just this joy that we have this opportunity to participate in what gets created within the landscape to help define who is it that we are as Ghanaians. I'll give an example. There's a lot of question about just pasticely taking the grass symbols and painting, and that's done. But I don't end the discussion there. I believe that they are amazing artifacts that we own. But then the question that comes to me is who made the painting and who made the grass symbol? And I'm interested in discussing that Ghanaian and what his thoughts were in creating those symbols we hadn't seen. So at the time we hadn't seen GMA, what was there? So it's interesting that you need sort of chase after those who created the symbols to understand their thinking to be able to evolve new things, and instead of just taking what they created and just posting it on cloth and posting it on buildings and calling the wall and a name wall or whatever it is. I think it's such a good way of thinking about that. I think that our Ghanaianness is about intelligence, and we need to discuss that intelligence that created the Kinte. Think about how Kinte is made. It's crazy. The whole mathematics of linearity and how you create this amazing fabric. I think that a lot can be learned from the tectonia, and a lot can be learned from the mechanics and the physics of it in the built environment. And it's obviously something that we must discuss getting into the 2020 and 2021 and beyond, 21st century issues and so on and so forth. So I think it's important. I think we also have to challenge on the future of architecture, the industries, Association of Ghana Industries, and the creators who create materials to be able to now create new things. Like I said, all we've done is just sort of use the basic resources and that's it. I think that is a narrative that persists in the next century. African creatives must start creating materials in conjunction with creatives, architects, designers, to start looking for new building materials. Look, if you look at the work that we do, we import maybe about 90-95% of the material. Just because you tell me who's creating toilets in this country, who's creating, who's designing toilets, who's designing glass, everything is important. The only thing that we have here that we really do is earth. And that seems to be the only discussion that we don't do, which I find very limiting. So there's a lot of need to invest in R&D. And so there's also that avenue. I mean, I have friends who are schooling in MIT, who are material science specialists, who are looking at new materials for African subgroups. But it's sad that it's happening in MIT and not happening in Ghana, where we should really be having a discussion about creating new materials for ourselves and the environment. So material science is obviously something that we should look at. I also think that we need to, the future architecture is bright. So far, we have 2 schools of architecture with a few more trying to sign up. And I'm, as secretary, I'm strongly encouraging that. Care University, that has been the bastion of most of the architects, maybe about 90% of registered architects schooled in Care University, which is really understandable. But I think that we need a few more design schools to competition is always a good thing, to create more competition and more opportunity for creatives and designers to have the opportunity to have access to design, and maybe not just architecture schools, but design schools that are thinking about the future. I think that those schools have to emerge, particularly in an Africa that is trying to define itself and trying to find its ground. And they need to sort of challenge the long-established institutions in trying to question what are thoughts on design. I think that what it does, competition always raises the game for everybody, because tech or central university will not sit there comfortable that we have our quota of students who are coming, because we're really 2 schools within the country that train architects. But you can imagine if you had about 10 schools of architecture, the kind of work that will be thrown out in the economy. So, in a nutshell, maybe my introductory commentary, these are sort of my contributions to the discussion that has been put forward, and I'm happy to engage with the audience and with yourselves on what your thoughts will be and any questions that you have based on what I've said. Thank you so much for your time. This one.
Thank you so very much for your wonderful words and very much deep insights. So we're entering into the Q&A session, where we're going to receive questions from our audience, and you would kindly open it up and express yourself with these questions. So we wait for these questions. Thank you very much again for participating in today's program. All right, so the questions are in. So from Ivana, she's asking, could he please elaborate on how to determine your value, or how, as a young architect, you can add or bring value to a firm you may be working with?
Very interesting question, and I'll relate it to. I'm sure you can hear me, can you? So let me, because I was just reading my text and I realized that people couldn't even hear some of the things I was saying. So let me just try and be very loud. If you work in a firm, and I've worked in a firm before, I'm still working in a firm, even though I sort of sit at the level of managing partner to sort of manage people, but you have to look at being indispensable. So if you work in a firm and you don't go to work for 1 week, or you're not there for a day, and nobody realizes that you're not there for a day, So the question is, you need to find out what are your strong suits, what do you bring to the firm. I'll take myself as an example. When I came out of school, I worked with a firm called Robert Hayford was the premier. And before I came out of school, I was very good with AutoCAD. I could really use the software very well as a beginning designer. And that was a huge asset for me. And I was also a very good design thinker. So I could sort of draw spatially and do that. And so there was a lot of value in getting me to participate very early in some of those things. So you always sort of have to look at what's your strong suit in that organization that you find yourself. Some people are very good renderers and presenters of work. So you need to sort of use that. And I'll give a very good example. I mean, all my guys here can use the software and all, but when it comes to my high level renders, I've been working with someone like Michael Chuberema for the last 10 years. And this year, for example, even though he's not part of my establishment and he's on his own, we just signed a retainer with him yearly to do our presentations for us, just because of the kind of detail and the way he's able to invoke the emotions that I need when it comes to presentation. So it's important when you're working with somebody to first ask yourself, what's your big play? It's almost like a footballer. I mean, if Ronaldo doesn't play, we know he didn't play. If Messi doesn't play, we know he didn't play. So you need to ask yourself, what kind of a player are you? What do you contribute to the discussion? And when you find that, get it as hard as you can, and you become indispensable. So think about being indispensable. These are my thoughts on that question. I hope I've done some justice to that.
Just please say you really have. And one wonderful gentleman, Joel Mensa, is asking, what other areas in the built environment, aside architecture, needs immediate improvement in the country? In his opinion, in your opinion, Okay, let me read it again. What other areas in the built environment, aside architecture, needs immediate improvement in the country, in your opinion, and how can we, as creatives, position ourselves to make this happen?
Wow, not an easy question. I think that I mean, it's a no-brainer. I mean, it's not only the architect who is part of the build process. The build process is made up of a large number of people. It's made up of engineers, which are structural and civil engineers. It's made up of mechanical, electrical, plumbing specialists. It's made up of quantity surveyors or cost consultants, as we call them. It's made up of project managers. That's the office staff, the pre-contract and the supervision groups. But when you look at it, you also look at artisanry, you look at masons, you look at steel vendors, you look at specialists on glass, tilers, painters, and so on and so forth. The list is endless. So it's big teams of people who are working on these things. I think that in the industry and in my experience, the search for some of the most perfect groups of people is not a very easy find. Like, for example, in a recent Alisa Hotel project, we through discussions with other colleagues of ours, chanced upon a number of amazing workers in Ghana. And a lot of people say, well, we don't have good tilers and we don't have good steel fabricators and so on and so forth. And we found these people. And if I show you the kind of stuff that we've done there, people even ask me if we want to bring people from Spain. And this is self-deprecating attitude that everything that is good is from outside this country. So I think to improve the chain, architecture is only one big discussion. But I think that there's a lot that must be disseminated to the craftsmen. The craft must be high. We must exact nothing but high standards from these people, and it's a matter of investment. I think that people like Constance Swanica, who is a specialist fabricator, is doing amazing. She set up a school to train people in the art. We need to look to Ghanaians who are interested in this to try and build groups of people who can actually do this work, to complement the work that we do and to help to craft these buildings. So it's not just the work of the architect. It also has to do the work of the contractors in exacting nothing but perfection from what it is. think generally we just have to take pride in the work. So beyond the architect, it's everybody who participates. The engineers have to bring their A game. The architects have to know what they want in their structural designs so they can exact that from the engineers within the limits of cost, because remember, cost is always a problem. The mechanical, electrical, and plumbing engineers have to do a great job and defend the work that they do, and the architects also have to participate with them. The cost consultants must be interested in making the project happen within the budget constraint. So it's, if you ask me that question, it's really everybody has to improve their game. And I hope that answers your question as far as those are concerned.
Yes, please, sir. One wonderful man, again, Godwin Now Mercy, is asking, in a scenario, please, how do I find a master in my creative field? Because I saw some works on Instagram about 3D modeling and I really loved them. So I DM'd the person and tried to engage with him, but he saw my message and ignored. I feel masters don't really want to associate with beginners because of the fear of we becoming better than them. So his question is, how do I find a master in my creative field?
That's an interesting experience that you have there. First of all, anybody that's a master is afraid of any beginner. If he's afraid of the beginner, he's not a master. He doesn't know what he offers. The truth. So hey, good on you that he didn't respond, whoever that person was, because those of us who are holding our craft and are concerned about our viewpoint and our approach care. No, we don't care about anybody else. We care about ourselves and what it is we're doing, because we are not competing against you or anybody else. We are competing against ourselves to be a better version of ourselves. So if you reach out to such a person and then he doesn't respond, that's okay. You reach out. Keep reaching out to people that, and of course, it's not just what you saw that makes the person a master. You can tell in the kind of work that we've done, and there'll be a list of them. Keep reaching out. I give you an example of Tadao. Tadao traveled all the way to Europe to look for Corbusier. Just when he got the Corbusier was there. So he visited Corbusier's work. And he learned a lot from him without Corbusier being there. So you don't always have to meet the person. You can study from afar what you're doing, and keep reaching out to those who know the job. Sometimes you must also be humble to serve under those people. I had a story from Matunto. No, it wasn't Matunto. It was Panji Anoff, great arranger, instrumentalist, musician. And Panji learns to play the horns with the late Matunto. And to learn it, they used to live very close to each other. And he went there and told him that, look, he doesn't have the money, doesn't have the instrument, but when Matunto plays the horns, something comes out, and that he wanted to learn. If Panji tells you what he went to study that instrument, I don't think kids of today will be interested in doing that. Matunto took him through almost 1 year of just simply cleaning the instrument and not playing. And that was huge. It was, why am I here cleaning the instrument and not learning anything? But in time, Mark started teaching one week after that. And today, he's an amazing musician and creator and producer. So, one must always seek, keep asking, don't stop. You just found one person. As for the part about masters being afraid of it, that person is afraid of you being better than him. It's not a master. Elisha said to Elijah, I want 10 times your power. Elijah did not say, you can't have it. He says, you can watch me rise as the chariots come from me, you will have that. And he was able to do it, and he had it. Great masters want their students to even outdo them. So the guy who wrote you was not a master. That's all I can say. Yeah.
Yes, please, sir. We have a question asking, in finding your niche, is it advisable to fully focus on attaining the set niche, or it is best to play it safe by having a touch of all available areas? Same. It is a question from Joel Mensa again.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Let me just apply it to me.
Yes.
In my experience, I've realized that there are people who can dabble in so many things. They have an entrepreneurial spirit of doing 1,001 businesses and things like this. There are also those of us, of which I form part, who can't. So, like some people, they are designers and they build at the same time, and that is not very easy for someone like me. I find my niche in growing design, and that's what I've done. So it depends on you, really. If you feel like you can touch 3-4 different places, but what I've realized is that you cannot. You have to focus in life. Sometimes we hop in different places because we're trying to make ends meet, and we're trying to find money and all of that. If you are not doing it because it's your passion, I'll give you an example. Kobe Bryant will tell you, the late Kobe Bryant will tell you that, he'll tell you that in the hands of somebody else, the basketball is nothing. But for him, he's playing with it, and at the end of the day, he's making a lot of money for it. So Kobe doesn't have to play basketball and go and be the owner of a team. He has to focus. Out of that focus comes other things. So in a sense, I relate it to a tree. A tree will grow with that strong stem, and out of it, the branches will happen. It's important to focus and know what it is you are about. This world will know you for something. They won't know you for everything. They'll know you for something. What is that? What is that special thing? Stick to it. Everything else will happen out of that process. So this is my response, at least how I understand it. Yeah.
Okay. So I have a question.
Yeah.
In the situation where you're trying to introduce something new into the creative ecosystem, but then it just doesn't seem like it's being accepted. Let me say it's appreciated, it's acknowledged, but then it's not being integrated. You know that you're trying to push this thing, but then people can just admire its beauty, but then you just can't, let me say, get them to want to implement it into their projects. So in that situation where you're trying to, push the boundaries, change the narrative, what do you do if all your efforts are still not being accepted?
It's an amazing question that you've asked. And I have a number of answers for it, or ideas to share on what it is you've asked. They won't be the first time. The late Zaha Hadid, if you've read about it. Today, the world knows Zaha Hadid, even posthumous because of her work. But if you read about her work in Harvard, it took years before she would win international competition as first prize winner because the thinking was so good. The only problem was it couldn't even be constructed. People couldn't do it. So the second prize winner would actually do the project, and even though she won first, because the problem was so complex that they can't understand it. It didn't kill her. She kept pursuing it until such a time as they were able to, the contractors were brought to that level. And today she occupies a space in the field of architecture that is truly enviable for a lady architect. So in the same way, we all sort of push ideas. Sometimes the ideas that are too ahead of their time, and so we can't appreciate them. It doesn't mean they're bad ideas. That's why I say keep your scrapbooks and keep your sketchbooks. If you read the Apple story, there are many innovations they could have done years ago, but because you didn't have 4G, 5G, you didn't have certain technologies that linked us in a certain way, some of these ideas could not be put out too early. So it's all about throwing that away. Again, on the flip side, one must also know which ideas, you sort of have to have a sense of ideas that will work. There's crazy thinking, and that must be encouraged because it's out of that that we get creativity. But sometimes there are creative people who create just maybe something that's maybe, I don't know if there's something that's too crazy that people may not be able to embrace because it will be a little difficult for them. But I think in time, in whichever way, whether it's crazy or not, in time, culture changes. And culture is adaptive. It's dynamic. That's the word I'm looking for. culture is dynamic. So as the culture changes and they see, if what you've done is actually discussing the truth, eventually people will gravitate. So don't worry about it. Sometimes some of us are ahead of our time. We should still continue to think. Yeah. Don't give up. Yeah.
Okay. So we have a question from Adam. First of all, he's saying, "Hello, sir. Thank you for the insight. Do you care sharing with us any of your designs with emphasis on the creative elements defining the design so we could better appreciate the sense of creativity in design? Probably the bridge or the EcoBank headquarters."
Unfortunately, I didn't give you images of that. Do you have any images of that? Of any of them? Maybe you should go online
Yes.
and sort of share those Google. You mentioned 2 projects, and those are the ones that are most discussed. There's a lot that we've done quietly with private clients and so on and so forth. But since you mentioned those 2, and maybe they will easily be found online. When you think about creating an icon, which is what, let me start with the bridge, first of all. Is a bridge on which one is on EcoBank? Okay, so then let me speak to EcoBank. In EcoBank, the question was, how do you sort of create an icon for a bank as EcoBank, which is, currently, if I'm not wrong, 37 countries in Africa, and really has the footprint within this great continent. And to come up with ideas on a building like this was one to think about, the ecosystem, and think about cradle to cradle concepts, to think about history. Also, we were lucky on that project to be placed on the Independence Avenue. And if you've read EcoBank's magazine, it says that it's the Pan-African. And so, if you think about Pan-Africanism, 2 people come to mind: Lady Selassie, Ethiopia, and Nkrumah, who is the father of Pan-Africanism. And so, on the Independence Avenue, Nkrumah sits at the top, drives all the way to the hill to Biasi, and continues on to the mountainous regions. So we found that the Independence Avenue was quite poetic to our placement as a project. And this project was won in competition run by the Architecture Registration Council at the time. The idea that was involved was a partnership between myself and my South African partners, ARC Architects, to come up with a building that responded to the environment, but also sort of created this bastion of strength for the future of the bank. If you look at banking history, and maybe when you think about the Bank of Ghana, which is one of the oldest buildings in banks, banks are fortresses that give everybody comfort that they're sort of protecting their money, and that they can rely on this institution. But what we had to create, we had to flip that story into the digital age, and generally this idea that by blurring the lines, that your money was still secure, and that the banks are more accessible. We are looking at the modernity of office spaces, and just sort of blurring the lines and creating this exciting space. So the building that we create there is responding to the brief, which deals with the bank requesting a tower block and also requesting a public face of the building, which is what you see as a small tower and a tall tower, and to link those 2 and create, not 2 separate buildings, but one complete building, was this idea of creating the street, which allows people to enter from the south as well as or the southeast and go towards the northwest, which is where the parking areas of the building are. The powerful plan form that was used was this idea of the ellipse, which really has a major and a minor axis. And if you look at the orientation of that ellipse, it's very intentional. It's sort of placed on the axis of the north and south orientation. So the pointed sides to its east and west, reducing the amount of exposure to the sun, whilst the longer sides expose itself to the north and south. And it was also a discussion of doing a glass building within an economy as the tropics and seeing how we can create an efficient glass building which will not overheat itself and so on and so forth. So the double skin facade for the very first time where we tried to digitize the world map, because Pan-Africanism is not just about Africa, it's about Africans everywhere in the world, and there's this rise and this strength in building something that is truly African and respected. And also maybe the biggest African map on the western side where we blanket off to cut off the sun. And just to talk about the pride of the African setup. Maybe one of the best glass buildings that has been done in this economy, because we also shade the building and keep it from generally just being overheated. But it's a question of what is possible given the African sub-region. The office plates allow all the offices to look to the beautiful views of the city and the ocean. As you rise up to about fourth, fifth floor, you see, Ifwa Sutherland Park, the connect between the civic center of the city and that development. And so those are some of the thoughts that started playing in the creation of EcoBank as a building, both 2 levels, basements, just because of the mathematics of the building, trying to use space judiciously. So that's the idea that sort of got involved in the EcoBank structure. It's just this idea of creating this seamless structure that just created indoor-outdoor connections and allowed us to enjoy the icon that we speak. When we go to the bridge, and I don't know if that's true now, that's one of my earliest projects where it was also a true discussion of how must we live in our homes. So I like the two, the big one and the small one, where it's about how must we live in this building. That is our homes. For me, a lot of what I'd seen were these, box buildings with very small windows, creating very dark interiors. And personally, that's what I talk about discovering yourself. I'm very claustrophobic. I don't like very tight spaces. I think that one must always be in connection with the environment. So the idea is to just sort of create these two volumes that are space and void and void. And the void at the bottom creates a living dining and kitchen area, which opens to these huge cabins. And then also the top terrace that also connects with the neighborhood and just sitting on the top and looking down. We call it the bridge because the master bedroom is on the top and overlooks everything that it surveys. So it's like the bridge of a ship, and without being symbolic about it, but being more intelligent about it. These were the thoughts we used, stone as a discussion of a material that we will not have to maintain over the long period. So these are maybe just in short some of the approaches that we sort of looked at in trying to create and redefine how we should live within our spaces. Created 3.3 high doors, all created locally by local craftsmen with glass and sliding doors, systems that were created by Assad just because we do not have maybe people to create those systems here. But yeah, that's a discussion of the building. How do you create a building that would allow you to have great discourse with your environment, be built very exceptionally well by the builders that built it, and seek for perfection, which is what we all keep doing. So I hope maybe this starts giving you a bit of an inroad into our approaches as a firm in trying to create new ways of looking at how we live, and not just sitting there and copying something that's on Instagram or whatever it is, but trying to respond to clients' needs as well as trying to create that form. I hope that gives you a bit of an inroad.
Yes, please, it does. So Joe Mensah again is asking, I find that designing thinking, I think he's trying to say design thinking. I find that design thinking is quite challenging for some designers. Is there a method? Is there a method to it, or is something inherent? Can you walk us through how you arrive at your designs?
Wow, that's there's a method. It's not magic. There's a method to most of these things. It's not a linear process, but it's some sort of idea. And I would recommend just a second. There's a book that I would recommend to you to read. Just a second. So it's not medical at all. There are those who practice it and will read it to find out that, oh, that's what I do. But it's a book that I keep like a Bible. And the title of the book is, it's written by Albert C. Smith and Kendra Shan Smith, Developing Your Design Process, 6 Key Concepts for Studio. I think the publisher's Rootnet. And I found this book, I think we bought it, published by the RIB. Sorry? The title again? Okay, let me just do it to you again. It's called Developing Your Design Process. I don't know if you can see this, but that's the title. That's the way it goes. Good. So Developing Your Design Process by Albert Smith and Kendra Smith. 6 Key Concepts for Studio. I think it's a phenomenal book that you can, sort of read. But yeah, there's a process to design, and we it's not a linear process. We believe in precedence, and precedence establishes history and what's already happened. So you are given a project to do, and do not think that you are the only person who's about to do that. Others before you have responded to that project in one way or the other. So it's important to understand what's been the world discussion on the same topic and what have other creatives done in that same area. So you must precedent to understand where this is coming from. This is important. As an architect, you need to take the stimuli. You need to visit the site, understand the context of the site. Even if you rent an architect, you need to understand what you're about to create for. If I'm actually designing on a hill, there's a slope, I need to appreciate that slope. If I'm actually designing a neighborhood like Osu and I'm surrounded by 3 houses, I need to understand that. And I think once you start taking that in, and then obviously the client is obviously going to tell you, I want on plot A, he wants a 4-story building that will accommodate living, dining, kitchen, and all of that. And the site is very small, and yet you have to create magic. So he starts putting in limitations. He will also tell you about his budget and what it is you have to do. When you've considered all of these things, you would also, if you want to go further, ask that person about what inspires them. Because you are creating stuff for people, and the question is, what do they like? So you need to sort of get into their brains and their psyche about what do they see, what are they looking for, how do they see space. And don't lose yourself, because you also have to find yourself in there. That's why they're coming to you. So you need to now merge what you understand over the time with what he has, and now begin to discourse. It's not a very simple process. You need to answer questions. So you start by trying to draw out your thinking. I don't do that. I think a lot before I start drawing. I'm worried about drawing stuff that doesn't make sense. I draw a lot in my mind. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but there are people who like to draw to see. I don't. I feel like it limits me. So I leave it floating in my mind like a butterfly and an idea that's going on. And I can sort of place it in the place. So by the time I'm ready and I'm starting to sketch something, the mathematics of it, thinking about the dimensional coordination, all of those things are coming together. And most likely the first sketch will lead me to where I'm going to. Sometimes we still have to give space for muse, and that is the huge thing that hits you and just makes you know this is the right direction to go into. I can't explain it any other way than being spiritual. So I'm not going to run away from the fact that sometimes when I'm confused, I pray. I go into that quiet place. I like the darkness. I try to sometimes stay alone in a very dark space. And when I stay alone, my phone is off. I don't want to hear anything from anybody. Creatives are like that. You need to cruise to be able to commune with maybe, people believe in magic, but we're talking about magic. You need to sort of tap into a higher power that will help you to see where it must go. And that is part of the process. People don't really want to believe in that, but there are times when great ideas have come to me because I was thinking so hard and I then slept, and by 3 a.m. It's happened maybe too many times. And I think it's all part of this idea of neurology, and this idea that you constantly be thinking about it, taking it to your dreams. And somehow it starts solving itself. So you must give yourself the chance to really discover some of these things and see how it comes out. And yeah, one step leads to another. For me as an actor, my appreciation of geometry is necessary. The musician, your appreciation of rhythm patterns, and just generally mixing it up is very necessary. And you must trust your senses. So those are parts of my approach in creating some of these things. But read that book that I've given to you. It has very interesting discussions on how we come to what it is. Some people have documented what it is we do, and it's much appreciated. Simplest way to do. So I hope I've helped you one way or the other.
Yes, please, you have. So Adam is asking, in a scenario, in our struggling economy, cost has become a key factor in determining the scale and beauty of designs, which some way shouldn't be the case. How do we push the elegant designs in our economy, especially in our rural and peri pre peri-urban areas, regardless of issues of cost?
Look, cost really. Now, watch this. Cost is a limitation. It's part of the juices. What do we say? We see that out of necessity, one creates, right? Out of necessity, we come up with innovation. So cost is actually a generator, which you must enjoy. I think that our thoughts on what phenomenon though is wrong. So a lot of people think that something is phenomenal because you created an ellipse. If you come to my office and you look at the Uber, you won't see many curvilinear buildings at there for one building, right? Because there the budget was there, right? You won't find clients doing that all the time. So in a sense, most of our work has also tried to elicit the magic out of the lines. We are trying to elicit the magic out of a single line. Why? Because of cost. So it drives us a lot. The simplest distance between, or the shortest distance between me and you, like standing in space, is a straight line. It takes the least effort. So the more complicated your building looks, doesn't mean it's architecture. That's the mistake that we make. we need to, a single wall running through a gap can elicit so much emotion. It is possible. So it's not about cost, it's about your ability to mix the limitation, which is cost, with trying to create magic in space. And it could be a box and it will still be magical. So don't worry about cost. I think that when you look at the works of Francis Keren, where he responds in Gangu to what he thinks schools should be in Gangu, which has now caught fire and government is sort of funding it. He's not the only one. There are a lot of people who responded to rural architecture here globally. It's about putting your ways to what's available and how you shape the resources. So don't worry about money. It's not money that creates great architecture. I mean, I mentioned Tadao is one of my most favorite. Tadao has, not the only one, there's a material called Offshaka concrete. And he does it in a church called the Church of Light in Japan. And it's one of the most amazing buildings. I've had the pleasure of visiting. And he doesn't use too many materials. He just uses concrete and wood. So it's not the complexity of it. It's whether it touches the soul. And sometimes you can use monolithia, just one material to create so much magic. So think into how you do that. And there are ways to do it. There are many examples in the world. So don't worry too much about materials and cost. First design the phenomenon, and you'll find your way. Yeah.
Yes, please. So Rich is asking, what are your thoughts on the current growth and development of our cities in Ghana? And where do you see the architect's role in the growth of our cities?
Powerful question. Powerful question. We're currently working on that. It's such a powerful question. My thoughts on the growth of our city is that it is very poor. And there are many factors that are causing this. First of all, and on many platforms, I've talked about the lack of master plans and master urban designs. More advanced societies take this seriously. who takes it seriously? Government, for Christ's sake. Who controls the space? Um, Government must make a strong fight for these things to be put in the right place. I can't do it as an individual. I'm the Secretary of Architecture. We're going to keep pushing government to try to, we make our strides and our steps one step at a time. But we need to have, how do you get somewhere without having a blueprint, right? So when you travel, and it's always heartbreaking for me to enter Europe, particularly, the Nordics, Scandinavia, and when you are landing,